From the 6th to the 4th century BCE, two empires, the Persians and the Greeks, were at the forefront of the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. The Greek society came about through their Mycenaean ancestors, which came to the area around 1600 BCE. After many centuries, the Mycenaeans grew into their Greek form. They would continue to be under their own power until the 2nd century. The Persian Empire grew exponentially starting in the 6th century BCE, with the help of a king named Cyrus the Great, who conquered and expanded over almost all the Near East. Based off the close proximity and trading routes, these two empires would have to interact. Despite their clashes in the 4th century, there was generally peaceful relations between the two for many a time. The most interesting aspect of these relations was the clash of the Persian Wars. Many ancient historians wrote about this war between both sides, but there is no written testimonies from the Persian text. Today, a fascination has sprouted regarding this war in the form of parodies and movies. In particular, the release of Zack Snyder's 300, based off the Battle of Thermopylae, staged for the audience a massive battle between the underdog 300 Spartans and a much greater Persian force. There has been mixed reviews on this movie, where most are positive, surrounding the cinematography, while most negatives were surrounding the accuracy of the characters involved and the overall history around the story. The negative connotation regarding the Persian Empire was blatantly shoved in the audience's face. Considering the lack of information from the Persian side, was Snyder's piece a portrayal of Greek personification of the Persians? This idea is that of Orientalism, which has been prevalent in many genres, and that is strongly apparent in the Greek history. This term, coined by Edward Said, states that Orientalism is a certain will or intention to understand, in some cases to control, manipulate, even to incorporate, what is manifestly different, or alternate and novel world. The ancient Greek historians orientalized the Persians and all of their writings they had about them. These wartime writing inspired the 2007 movie, along with a graphic novel, and thus should be the reason for why the movie presented itself.
Madman. You're a madman.
Air and water. But you'll find plenty of both down there.
No man, Persian or Greek, no man threatens a messenger. To me.
Madness. This is Sparta!
This scene portrays the king of Sparta, Leonidas, as sticking to his honor regarding denying submission. However, this shameful act, kicking the messenger into the well, was undoubtedly dishonorable. Not only in antiquity, but throughout history, a certain amount of respect towards messengers was given in order for communication to flow between sides. This is where we get the statement, "Don't shoot the messenger." By doing this, Leonidas would have made a dishonorable act, which would not only disgrace himself, but the Spartans in general. This scene comes from Herodotus' The Histories, but what isn't shown is that later on, Leonidas and his Spartans regretted their decision because it was a tradition to keep safe passage for messengers. He even sends volunteers as envoys to Xerxes, so that they could be sacrificed. Instead of killing these men, Xerxes decides to spare them and send them back, which Herodotus describes of noble high-mindedness. This example adds dimensions to the Persian Empire, showing them not only as the evil men from the east trying to take over Greece. Herodotus was accused by Thucydides as Persian-loving, for showing noble things along with the bad. He was still trying not to glorify the Persians over the Greeks, but he does, interestingly enough, show some honorable actions of the Persians. This inclusion does give a hint that Persians were not barbarians. In 300, the writers overemphasize the tyranny behavior of the Persian king Xerxes, which does not truly reflect the characteristics of the king. Persian kings were quite accepting of cultural differences, especially in the army. The movie portrayed all the troops of the Persians' army as one entity. They all dressed the same and looked the same.
The Persian Empire ranged from Egypt to the borders of India. Therefore, Xerxes' army had a varying amount of ethnicities regarding their troops. The East was also portrayed as a mystical land, and this film was an exact example of that. Therefore, it is also an example of Edward Said's ideology of Orientalism.
At all. The world will know that free men stood against a tyrant, that few stood against many. And before this battle was over, that even a god king can bleed.
This scene is an example of Orientalism, how Leonidas called the Spartans free versus Xerxes' tyranny, how god kings can bleed, and how few fought against many. As mentioned earlier, Xerxes was not the tyrant that he was made out to be. As for the few versus many comment, it is indeed true that the Spartans were greatly outnumbered by the Persians, but how large of an army it was is highly criticized. Herodotus no doubtly has increased the number of Persians in this battle to add entertainment to the story, as well as validate the strength of the Spartans. Finally, when it comes to Xerxes being a god king, Persian rulers didn't believe themselves to be gods. They believed that the ultimate ruler had a special relationship with the high god Ahura Mazda, but they themselves were not gods. This special connection also does not permit them from fighting in battles. One thing Greek historians did not understand is why the Persian kings would not fight in their battles. They saw it as them just being cowards, which is Xerxes is portrayed in the movie. We see from the battle scenes Leonidas fighting many Persians, which makes us want to believe that he is much more brave compared to Xerxes. But it is actually Xerxes' devotion to his religion that confines him to only watch and lead his people and not fight.
Let me guess. You must be Xerxes. Come, Leonidas.
Xerxes was often portrayed as a ruler who was opposed to the Hellenistic freedoms of the West and shown with qualities that were cruel and smug.
The Persian people were described as slaves, only there to serve the king. The king was shown to not care about his people.
In spite of this portrayal, Herodotus did note that Xerxes was the most fit and suitable person to rule the Persian people. This shows that he was noble enough to transcend the Oriental design, according to Eric Ruin.
In terms of the film, the ideological orientation was often critiqued as similar to propaganda of East versus West. Although this sentiment may have not been Snyder's intent, it should still be noted how prevalent that this movie can be looked as such. This shows how that even today there remains some sort of tension between the East and the West, and this film was definitely Orientalized, East being bad, West being good. From this movie, it is evident that Orientalism is not only of the ancient times, but is still prevalent today. Even though certain sources show nobility in the Persian Empire, Snyder clearly made a movie surrounding a ruler acting on hubris, trying to take over honorable people. All this movie was based off a graphic novel by Frank Miller. Neither provide an accurate portrayal of what the sources said. With the coming sequel to 300 entitled 300, Rise of an Empire, the eyes of many will be focusing back on this period of time.